You know who I was thinking about the other day? Rick Martel. He was a master of getting under your skin in the ring. But then, poof, he was gone. As of today, he is 70, and you need to know where he is now. In Quebec City, there's a man named Richard Vigneault. Most people there just know him as a successful businessman. He looks after properties, he travels with his wife Johan, and he spends time with their daughter Coralie. His life is calm. He's in his 70s now and enjoying peace. If you saw him walking down the street, you'd never guess who he used to be. Because years ago, the whole world knew him as Rick Martel. Not just Rick Martel, but the model Rick Martel. In the late 80s and early 90s, he was one of the most colorful characters in wrestling. He strutted down the aisle with fancy clothes, perfect hair, and a smug smile. He sprayed his so-called cologne arrogance into the air, sometimes even into people's faces. He acted like he was the best-looking, best-dressed, most perfect man alive. Fans booed him. They wanted to see him get knocked down. And that was the point. His path into wrestling wasn't something he had planned. It happened suddenly because of his older brother, Michel. Michel was already wrestling under the name Mad Dog Martell. He was Rick's hero. In 1973, Michel was wrestling in the Canadian Maritimes when one of the wrestlers on the card got hurt. They needed someone right away. Michel said, "My little brother can do it." The problem was Rick was only 17. He had never wrestled a professional match. He had a background in amateur and Greco-Roman wrestling, but that's not the same thing. Still, he said yes. The very next day he stepped into the ring. No training school, no slow build, just straight into the fire. And you know what? He pulled it off. He survived, and not only that, he found out he was good at it. That was the start of Rick Martel's journey. But just when things were starting to move forward, tragedy hit. In 1978, his brother Michel died suddenly of a heart attack while wrestling in Puerto Rico. He was only 33. For Rick, it was devastating. Michel wasn't just his brother, he was his mentor, his guide through the crazy business of wrestling. Rick thought about walking away, but he didn't. He decided to keep going, and that meant he had to figure out the wrestling world on his own. It wasn't easy. Wrestling back then was tough. Promoters could be ruthless. The travel was brutal. But Rick was determined. Over the next few years, he wrestled all over the world. He learned in Calgary in Stu Hart's famous dungeon, a place known for stretching wrestlers to their limits. He went to Japan, where the style was stiff and realistic. He wrestled in Puerto Rico, where the crowds were wild and sometimes dangerous. He wrestled in New Zealand and won the British Commonwealth title 3 times. Each place taught him something different. He was like a sponge. He picked up techniques. He studied how crowds reacted. He learned how to tell a story in the ring. He wasn't just wrestling. He was building a deep understanding of the craft. In the late 70s, he got a break in the Pacific Northwest, in a territory run by Don Owen. That's where he teamed with a young Roddy Piper. Together, they had great chemistry. They won titles and made a name for themselves. Fans loved the energy they brought, but like all things in wrestling, it didn't last forever. In 1980, Rick lost a loser leaves town match and moved on. That same year, he joined the WWF. This was before the company exploded into the global brand we know today. But even then, it was a big stage. Rick was paired with veteran Tony Garea. Tony became like a big brother to him. Together, they formed a team that wrestled differently than most others. While a lot of tag teams brawled and fought dirty, Martell and Garea wrestled clean. They were technical and smooth. Fans respected that. The team won the WWF Tag Team Championship twice. They beat big, tough teams like the Wild Samoans and the Moondogs. These matches weren't easy. The division was full of heavy hitters, but Martell and Garea stood out because they brought skill and teamwork. For Martell, it was proof he belonged on the big stage. But Martell's career wasn't just about being a tag team guy. After leaving the WWF in the early 80s, Rick Martel signed with the American Wrestling Association. The AWA was run by Vern Gagne, a man who believed deeply in old-school wrestling. He didn't want flashy characters or cartoon heroes. He wanted skilled wrestlers who could go in the ring, and Martel fit that perfectly. Martel rose up the ranks quickly, and on May 13, 1984, in St. Paul, Minnesota, he beat Japanese legend Jumbo Tsuruta to win the AWA World Heavyweight Championship. Later, Martel would call this moment the greatest accomplishment of his career. the highest point. There's even a photo from that time where he's holding the championship belt and showing it proudly to his parents. You can see the joy on his face. For a man who had gone through so much, losing his brother and traveling the world just to find his place, this moment meant everything. At that time, wrestling had three big world champions. Ric Flair was carrying the NWA, Hulk Hogan was carrying the WWF, and now Rick Martel was carrying the AWA. That put him in elite company. He wasn't just another guy on the card. He was the face of one of the top three promotions in the world. For the AWA, making Martell their champion was a big decision. They had just lost Hulk Hogan to Vince McMahon's WWF. Hogan had been their biggest star, their box office draw. Vern Gagne knew he couldn't replace Hogan with another cartoon character. He had to go in a different direction. So he put the belt on Martell, a man known for his technical ability and professionalism. Martell wasn't the flashiest guy, but he was credible. He was the anti-Hogan. Where Hogan flexed and posed, Martell wrestled. The AWA was making a statement. They were saying, "We're not sports entertainment, we're wrestling." Martell didn't disappoint. His reign lasted 595 days, almost 2 full years. It was the longest AWA World title reign of the entire decade, and it gave the company some much-needed stability after losing Hogan. Martell defended the belt against legends like Nick Bockwinkel and Jimmy Garvin. He traveled across territories and even went overseas to represent the AWA. One of his proudest moments came in Japan. There he stepped into the ring with NWA World Champion Ric Flair in a rare champion versus champion match. For Martell, it was validation. He wasn't just the champ of a fading territory. He was standing across from Flair, one of the greatest of all time, and proving that he belonged. But carrying a company on your back takes its toll. Martell learned this firsthand during his series of matches with Stan Hansen. Hansen was famous for his stiff, brutal style. He hit hard and didn't hold back. Martell once said wrestling Hansen was like trying to stop a bulldozer. Night after night, he went toe-to-toe with that bulldozer, and it wore him down. On December 29, 1985, Martell's long reign finally came to an end when he lost the title to Hansen. For most wrestlers, losing the World Championship would be heartbreaking. But Martell felt something different. He felt relief. For 19 months, he had carried the weight of the AWA on his shoulders. He had traveled constantly, worked a punishing schedule, and lived with the pressure of being the man everyone depended on. When it was over, he could breathe again. That reaction says a lot about Rick Martel. To him, wrestling was his job, not his entire identity. He didn't cling desperately to the spotlight like so many others. He didn't define his life by the belt. He wanted balance. He wanted time for himself, for his family, for life outside the ring. That would be a theme throughout his career. After his run in the AWA, Martell eventually made his way back to the WWF in 1986. This was a different WWF than the one he had left. By now, Vince McMahon's vision of sports entertainment was in full swing. Big characters, colorful outfits, and larger-than-life personas filled the roster. And Martell adapted once again. At first, he teamed with Tom Zenk as the Can-Am Connection. They were young, good-looking, and high energy. Fans liked them right away, but the team didn't last long. Zenk left the company and Martell had to pivot. Soon he found himself teaming with Tito Santana, and together they formed Strikeforce. Strikeforce clicked instantly. They had chemistry, they had speed, athleticism, and charisma. And before long, they were on top of the tag division. They beat the Hart Foundation to win the WWF Tag Team Championship, and fans loved them. For a while, Strikeforce was one of the most popular teams in wrestling. That's why what happened next was such a shock. At WrestleMania 5, during a match against the Brainbusters, Martell had enough. He got frustrated with Santana, walked out on his partner, and left him to lose the match. Just like that, Strikeforce was done. Fans were stunned. Martell had been one of the good guys for so long. He was smiling, polite, dependable, and now he had turned his back on his partner. Overnight, he went from hero to villain. But here's the interesting part. This wasn't just Vince McMahon's idea. Martell himself had been asking for it. He felt like his clean-cut babyface role had run its course. He wanted to change. He wanted to reinvent himself. And he was right. What came next was The Model. It was one of the most memorable gimmicks of the late 80s and early 90s. Martell leaned all the way into arrogance. He wore a turquoise sport coat. He carried a giant pin that read, "Yes, I am a model." And of course, he had his atomizer filled with arrogance, his signature cologne. He sprayed it into the air, into the crowd, and sometimes right into his opponent's face. It was simple but effective. Fans hated him, but Martell didn't just change his look. He changed the way he wrestled. He slowed things down. He cut out the flashy drop kicks that used to get cheers. He started using cheap, underhanded tactics. He built his whole style around making sure the fans never wanted to cheer for him. That's how dedicated he was. He wanted all the glory to go to the babyface he was wrestling against. That's old school psychology, and Martell was a master at it. As the model, he had some of the most memorable feuds of his career. His rivalry with Jake the Snake Roberts started when he sprayed Jake in the eyes with arrogance, supposedly blinding him. It led to their famous blindfold match at WrestleMania 7. The whole match was built on crowd reactions, with Jake pointing around the ring while fans shouted where Martell was. On paper, it sounds silly, but it worked. Fans were glued to it. He also feuded with a young Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid. Their story was built on vanity, with each man claiming to be the better-looking superstar. They even had a match at SummerSlam 1992, where neither one was allowed to punch the other in the face. It was different, and it showed Martell could adapt to any storyline. Another feud was with Tatanka. In classic heel fashion, Martell stole Tatanka's sacred eagle feathers and pinned them to his beret like some kind of fashion accessory. It got huge heat and made fans despise him even more. Through all of this, Martell proved once again that he could reinvent himself. He had been a respected world champion, a beloved tag team star, and now he was one of the most effective villains in the company. Eventually, his time in the WWF came to an end. But in 1998, he made a surprising comeback in WCW. And here's the twist. He looked incredible. He was in some of the best shape of his life. He was lean, muscular, and ready to go. WCW pushed him right into a feud with Booker T for the television title. On February 16, 1998, Martell actually beat Booker on Nitro to win the belt. It looked like he was about to have a whole new chapter in his career, but fate had other plans. Just 6 days later at Super Brawl, in a rematch with Booker, Martell got hurt. Really hurt. During a simple hip toss, his leg caught awkwardly on the ropes. He tore ligaments, damaged cartilage, and fractured his leg. The pain was brutal. But Martell didn't quit. He wrestled for another 5 minutes, changed the finish on the fly, and let Booker win the match. He knew protecting his opponent's credibility was more important than protecting his own reign. That's the kind of professional he was. That injury should have been the end, but Martell fought to come back. After months of rehab, he returned to Nitro in July. Sadly, disaster struck again. In a match with Stevie Ray, Booker's brother, Martell took a move called the slapjack. He was so focused on protecting his knee that he landed badly and injured his neck. 2 vertebrae were damaged. This time it was over. He knew his career was done. There was no farewell speech, no final tour. Just like that, a 25-year career ended quietly. And that's Rick Martel's story in a nutshell. He was a world champion who carried a company. He was a smiling good guy fans loved. He was an arrogant villain fans loved to hate. He was a journeyman, a teacher, and a true professional. Even when injuries cut him down, he thought about the business and about his opponents first. Today, he's living quietly back in Quebec. No spotlight, no arrogance. Just a man who gave everything to wrestling and walked away with dignity. His name may not always be mentioned alongside Hogan or Flair, but to those who watched him, to those who worked with him, Rick Martel will always be remembered as one of the very best. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the flashiest, but he was one of the smoothest and most professional wrestlers to ever step through the ropes. He made his opponents look good, he reinvented himself when the time was right, and he showed the world how important psychology and character work really are in wrestling. Even though his career ended too soon because of injuries, his legacy is still here. You can see his influence every time a cocky, arrogant, pretty boy heel steps into the ring. And you can hear the respect in the voices of the wrestlers who worked with him. To them, Rick Martel wasn't just the model, He was the model of what a true professional should be. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, leave a comment with your favorite Rick Martel memory, and subscribe for more stories from wrestling history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.